All right. We're ready to go, and I'd like to call the Business and Governance Committee meeting of January 12th, 2017 to order. Do we have a quorum?
Yes, we have a quorum.
Do we have any non-agenda public comment?
No public comment.
Then we have, it looks like 6 action items to address this morning. Why don't we dig into the first one, staff's recommendation to revise the board process for review of the internal auditor, and that would be Mr. Tran.
Hey, good morning and Happy New Year. So staff is recommending a few minor changes to this process. We vetted these changes with the audit committee in December, and they've approved these changes. I've highlighted those changes in my staff report, but would welcome any questions you have.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none. We want to have a motion. I've made the motion. We have a second from Tom Sullivan, who is up until 2 in the morning, so I'm glad that he's able to function. And call
Ready
for
to
vote.
vote? All
That
those
carries.
in.
Item number 2 is staff's recommendation to revise Board Rule 2.90, applicable mortality tables and assumptions for determining actuarial equivalence. Say that 5 times fast. And again, Johnny.
Yeah, I'm going to invite Marcel Rossman to sit up here in case you have any questions about calculating benefits this way, since she's your chief benefits officer. But this board rule addresses the assumptions staff uses to calculate benefits that require actual equivalence. Staff is recommending changes that will address 2 things. One, we ask that the board revise the board rule to clarify exactly what benefits are covered and to expand that list to cover similar benefits that require an interest rate. I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. The second item is to clarify what interest rate should have been used for fiscal year 2015 and 2016 to calculate these benefits. So in the past, what we should have used. Let's talk about part 1 first. Currently, the board rule says you should calculate the benefits that require actual equivalence as defined in the municipal code. Well, that doesn't cover all the benefits that require actual equivalence that aren't defined, and we also have the port and airport plan. So instead of having staff try to translate what that is, if you look at the proposed revisions, I've listed exactly what benefits should be covered. We also believe that this list should be expanded to cover other benefits.
That's under Roman 3, the bullet points? Where's the,
I believe it is.
all right?
It should say either revised or red line should show the changes.
Oh, okay.
It's the 4th document down.
All right. It's the revised rule, and it's the bullet points under 2.90. Okay.
Yeah. And I also believe we should expand that list to include similar benefits that require an interest rate that we don't have a rule. So, for example, a few benefits require SDCERS to calculate the actuarial present value of a proposed benefit stream. Currently, the board doesn't have a rule to do that. We would like to incorporate that similar benefit into this rule, so that way staff has proper guidance on that. The second portion of staff's recommendation is addressing the correct interest rate that should be used to calculate actual equivalent benefits for fiscal year 2015 and 2016. Staff has calculated those benefits using a 7.50% interest rate. That interest rate was recommended by Chiron, your actuary, back in November 2012, and that's what we did. It's also consistent with the plans as written by the port, city, and airport. However, in November 2012, former staff revised proposed revisions to Rule 2.90, which added an assumption, and that assumption being the interest crediting rate applied to the members' contribution accounts. Now, the interest rate that staff uses to credit members' accounts is irrelevant to calculating actual equivalence, separate things. So I personally am not exactly sure what former staff meant by that. However, it could mean that staff should have used the interest rates in 2.41 to calculate the benefits for these 2 fiscal years. If that were the case, then staff should have used 7.25% instead of 7.50%. But that interpretation would be adverse to Chiron's recommendation that we received, And I don't know if that was the board's intent back then or the board's decision now to deviate from that recommendation. So staff sees two options in addressing this and seeks the board's clarification on it. Option 1 being the recommended choice. Staff is recommending that the board select option 1, and in doing so, what that means is that Board Rule 2.90 did not require the use of the interest rates listed in 2.41 to calculate the actual equivalent benefits for the 2 fiscal years at issue. That the board intended to follow Chiron's advice, and that staff properly calculated those benefits using 7.50. The alternative to that would be option 2, which is finding that the board rule as written should have required SDCERS to calculate the benefits at 7.25%. In choosing that option, it would affect about 800 member benefits. The amount of those corrections is estimated amount of those corrections is listed in the staff report as well as my memo to you.
Can you go ahead and state, I think it's important to just have you talk for a second about the magnitude of the impact to the members and to the system?
Do you want to do that, Marcel, or would you like me to?
You have it in your report there, right?
I do. So we
It's about $40,000.
We
correct
estimate it'll
those 2
affect
years.
over 800 retirees. It's a less significant portion of their benefit, $2 to $8. We're generally talking about the cost of living annuity, a component of a retiree's benefit. And so we would tweak that portion of the benefit from 7.5 to 7.25. But it affects a large amount of our retirees.
So they're a large number, but a small amount per member.
Yes,
$2 to $8 per member per
Month,
month.
per month.
yes,
That would be a reduction in benefit,
correct.
Yes.
and the impact in total would be about $40,000.
To go back and correct retroactively, yes.
Okay.
Then there would also be correction, it would be then corrected going forward.
Okay, and you have a recommendation, and you're going to explain why you're making it?
Sure. So the recommendation is to codify what we actually did. And the reason for that, as Johnny mentioned, is because when Chiron looked at this, they said that you're not required to use the discount rate to annuitize benefits. And they didn't make a recommendation to change it, and we didn't change it. And so there's nothing that says it was done incorrectly. It just appears it wasn't consistent. So the recommendation we have is to not go back and correct those benefits, to say that what we did was appropriate under the guidelines provided by Chiron, and then to, in the future, look at that again and see, going forward, at what point do we change that?
Which will be a very slight benefit to a large number of members and a very modest, in the scheme of things, detriment to the system.
Correct.
Okay?
But there's nothing that says that what was done,
Was
we're
wrong.
not violating the plan documents with what we did.
I understand.
That 40,000 does not include any staff time involved with correcting 800.
No,
Okay.
it does not.
Which might exceed the $40,000 that we're,
Which,
go on.
Yes.
which would exceed that $40,000.
So
yes.
we would be, financially, we'd be shooting ourselves in the foot to take this benefit away from our members.
Potentially, yes.
Then I don't think we have much of a choice.
And the $40,000 value, you're correct that it's the overpayment. So prospectively, it's different. But
Yes,
Right.
prospectively, those things are captured when we approve the valuation in Appendix C. Is that, did I read that correctly? That we capture these interest rates on how these annuitized benefits are calculated?
We'll be proposing a board rule to do that, yes. So this is to determine what has happened.
Right.
And then after the valuation is accepted, then we would look to what is the interest rate for fiscal year 2018? What's the interest rate we should be using to annuitize these benefits?
Correct. Okay.
Got it.
I know we've stated this a few times already, but I do want to be redundant on this. There is no $40,000 overpayment that we are failing to correct.
Got it.
Unless you determine that we failed to follow an ambiguous board rule, which is not clear on what you should be doing,
Got it.
right?
Thank you. All right. Do we have any further discussion? You want to keep, you done?
I am done. I just think we would need to clarify the language that is up there
Right.
right now to add to the end of that sentence, selecting option 1. That would be staff's recommendation.
Okay, when the motion's made, we'll add that.
Thank you, Val.
Okay, so
Like that.
I don't have a problem making the motion, so motion to approve staff's recommendation to revise Board Rule 2.90, selecting option 1. There we go.
We don't have buttons on this.
There we go.
Is what the problem is. Okay, there we go. Go ahead.
There we go. Option 1.
All right, the motion's been made and seconded.
Ready to vote? All votes are in.
Motion carries 4-0.
Thank you, Marcel.
All right, that brings us to item 3, staff's recommendation to adopt the board policy regarding disaster event and resolution 2017-01. Authorized signatories. Again,
Yeah, last year staff performed a disaster recovery exercise. In doing so, we realized that staff didn't have the adequate authority for purchasing power in case of an emergency to cover our business continuity plan. So the proposed policy and the proposed resolution address that concern that we have and gives the CEO the authority to make those purchases in case of a disaster, subject to the limitations in the policy.
any discussion about that? All right.
Where'd you guys come up with the numbers?
The 50,000 up to 250,000, Tom?
Yes.
In discussion with IT about exactly how much we think we would need in terms of things that we would need to replace, possibly moving off-site to a different building outside of California, hiring professionals, discussions with Mark about his comfortability level with the amount, not exceeding 50,000 on his own. That's how we came up with the numbers.
I'm concerned it might be a little low.
I just didn't know what the scope of it would be.
Yeah, $50,000 is my current spending authority without asking for board approval, and I was uncomfortable doing more than that, and even in a disaster, without at least getting some concurrence from the board leadership, which is why I wanted to make sure that you were involved if we had to spend more than 50.
So the motion has been made. And there's now a second from Dr. Sullivan.
Ready to vote?
Get promoted all the time.
And that motion also carries 4-0.
Just so you know, I like sitting over there better.
Item 4 is staff's recommendation to revise the education policy. Mr. Tran.
Hey, currently the education policy is pretty rigid. It requires each of you to have a fiscal year education plan, and oftentimes the classes that you want to take aren't listed yet when that report is due in May. So the revisions give you some flexibility, which is truly what we do now. When a class is available, we allow you to add that. So we'd like the education policy to reflect that. We'd also like to invite the non-board members that sit on the audit committee and the investment committee to sit in fiduciary training that you receive each year.
That's training that occurs here in the boardroom.
It does.
We need buttons. Okay, I've made the motion. Alan seconded the motion.
Ready to vote? All votes are in.
And it carries 4-0. Try not to step on Ms. Joyner's toes over there. Items 5 and 6 are staff's recommendations on appeals. First, we have staff's recommendation to deny the appeal of Marianne Toomey, and that is Susan Youngflesh.
Good morning. Ms. Toomey is the former spouse of a General City member. She was overpaid benefits of approximately $19,000, which she was offered to pay. She appeals the interest of approximately $18,000. In turn, we underpaid the member, and he'll be refunded the amount owed to him. The member and Ms. Toomey have been in communication and are unable to come to an agreement. SDCERS has an obligation to keep the system whole and must recoup the overpayment, and therefore we recommend the denial of Ms. Toomey's appeal.
All right, so this is a tough case. It's a lot of interest. You want to have any discussion?
Yeah, if I recall, the basis of her appeal was financial hardship.
Yes.
Did she provide detail of her financial hardship? I mean, and was there a determination that this would or would not be a financial hardship on Ms. Toomey?
Her detail was limited to the offering of the $19,000 that she would have to pay, and then just a plea that she would possibly have to sell her house if she was to.
You charged the interest?
Yes.
But she didn't, other than I might have to sell my house, or what, there was no, I'm in this much debt, I have this much income, this is
No.
going to affect me,
Ms. Cynthia Queen was in a lot of communication with Ms. Toomey, so she might be more familiar with any further detail, but as far as paperwork, no.
Okay. Cynthia, did you want to?
Come up here, Cynthia.
If I may, in reviewing the letter to Mr. Hovey, dated August 16th, 2016, which should be attached to your exhibits, she does break down her monthly expenses, and she states her monthly retirement income is $2,005 derived from SDCERS benefits, spousal support, Social Security, and IRA distribution, and her monthly income is $2,105.
I apologize, I didn't scroll past all of the court documents. Let me get to that.
Is this, is there any basis on which to distinguish this situation from the recent ones, and one in particular I'm thinking of, where we wrote to the city, this plan sponsor, and asked the plan sponsor to pay the interest?
As far as facts and distinguishing it to the city,
Is there any reasonable basis to believe the city would take a different position here?
no, there isn't. Historically, the city has denied any of our requests, and I don't think that they would change their mind in this case.
Okay.
I believe Susan already said this. In this case, the total amount that's been paid out is correct. It's really money that's going from one person
member
to
to
the
another.
other, right? So in the city's case, they wouldn't, if they covered something, they would be incurring a cost in addition to what's already been legitimately paid out.
Right.
Okay.
So before I get into the details of our financial hardship, I guess a question for Johnny. Do we have the authority to determine that, yes, this would create a financial hardship and waive the interest? And then I guess the next question would be for Mark, what impact does that have on the system, and how do we capture the interest that we waived?
Well, I believe the board has the plenary authority to administer the plan the way it believes it needs to. So that if it means compromising an overpayment, then that could be within your fiduciary authority. With that said, you have a overpayments policy that says you will follow the IRS correction guidelines, which says you got to get the money from somewhere if you don't get it from the member. So in not getting it from the member, your decision would beg, where would you get it from if you were to follow your overpayments policy?
Right, well, I think it's clear it would be rolled into the UAL, and the city would pay the interest by rolling it into the ADC. And then we could withstand a challenge from the city on our decision. Is that a fair assumption on how this could play out?
Yes, that is a fair assumption.
Okay. Mark, do you have anything you want to?
Could I ask one
Just
further question
clarifying
along that line?
Go ahead.
If you roll it into the ARC, if you
Into the valuation?
do it that way, doesn't that basically answer the question for everybody that we would never essentially, in a case of hardship, have to collect the interest? We would always roll it into the ARC. And does that put us at odds with our policy or with IRS guidelines?
The answer is yes to both questions. I think waiving the interest and rolling into the ADC would be inconsistent with other corrections the board has asked us to make or through their policy. Two, it would technically jeopardize the tax qualification of the SDCERS plan as a whole. by not following the guidance of the IRS?
Well, we'd still be funding the plan. I think the IRS is more concerned with our failure to fund the plan. The plan would still be funded because the interest would be collected through the valuation. And ultimately, the plan sponsor pays the difference. So I don't think that we're in jeopardy of an IRS issue as long as we maintain the funding.
So the intermediate step that's sort of involved in this is that the IRS requires you to request the city pay it. You need to collect it from someone. So if we didn't collect it from the member, we would be obligated per IRS policy to request it from the city. And they would need to deny it. And at that point, we would be confronted with a situation, do we want to pursue litigation against the city and or the member to collect it? And then the board has a decision if they don't want to pursue that litigation. Only in those circumstances would it be permissible to put it into the ADC. That has happened a few times before, but you first need to go through the process of asking for the city and getting a denial from them to pay before the IRS would say you've done everything that you need to do.
And have we presented to the city the financial picture of Ms. Toomey and made the request for interest?
Have not.
Have not.
However, if I can interject that if we were to do that and request that from the city, we are placing Ms. Toomey in the point of being in mental anguish, if you will, for that period of time when historically the city has always denied that request. And then we'll come back to you, most likely with the same recommendation.
And so this is, I guess, the city's changed in the past 2 months. So, and that's why I hate to just sit on past practice of they've always done this, we've always done this. Policymakers have changed at the city. And so I think our diligence would be we go back and ask the new policymakers if this is still their opinion. Because their policy may have changed.
We can certainly try that.
So, Marcel?
I just want to make sure, too, that you're very clear. I know Mark mentioned this, but make sure you're very clear. Right now, the system is whole on this issue.
Correct.
Because we have not collected from Ms. Toomey and we have not paid Mr. Toomey. So the correction is collect from Ms. Toomey, pay Mr. Toomey, and the system still remains whole. If we don't collect the interest, that's when we've made the system not whole. Unlike other corrections you've seen in the past where the system already is in a deficit, and if we don't collect, the system remains in a deficit. So I just want to make sure you're clear of the distinction in this correction, and also that you would be asking the city to cover payments for a non-member.
Correct.
Because Ms. Toomey is not for someone who was not a city employee. And a
Right,
non-member.
she's a member of the system.
She's not a member of the system.
Well,
She
she's
is the-
receiving,
She's
she's a beneficiary
she's a
of the system.
beneficiary, but she's
Right.
not a member of the system.
Right.
So that's a little
But
bit
we have
different.
a duty to our members and beneficiaries.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're clear on all those nuances, that
Right,
she is
right.
not the former city employee. Her former spouse is the former city
No,
employee.
I understand. I think we would be asking the city to pony up more money to address the correction that we're trying to make to the benefits for Ms. Toomey and Mr. Toomey. Yes.
Correct.
One other item which may be obvious, as Marcel said, we have not yet paid Mr. Toomey the amount, the principal nor the interest. So if the board said not to pay Mr. Toomey the interest and Ms. Toomey also didn't pay the interest to us, the system is
You'd still be whole.
neutral, right?
Right.
But that would be inconsistent with our policy not to pay Mr. Toomey the interest that he's owed.
Right.
So Mr. Toomey could essentially waive the interest. Mrs. Toomey wouldn't have to pay it.
Correct.
And we'd be square.
That's correct.
That seems like a just result, but we can't impose that.
And
Correct.
it sounds like Mr. and Mrs. Toomey are not agreeing on this, on a resolution for this, from what your comments were, Susan.
If I may
Yeah.
refer to Cynthia?
If I would, sorry. Just to add on that point, I had been in discussion with Mr. Toomey, and thus far, the situation had not been worked out. But one of the questions what would be the result from the board meeting? So if this were to be denied today and then denied tomorrow, I would continue to work with the member before any money went one direction or another. I always try to work through to the end to a potential best outcome in these difficult situations.
So back to my original question, I'm trying to understand. So she appealed on the basis of financial hardship.
Yes.
And so we're going to deny on the basis that she does not have a financial hardship. Is that, or are we not, are we going to disregard her claim of financial hardship because it's irrelevant and deny because it's just not within our policy? What is the basis of our denial if we move to deny?
Well, she appealed based on financial hardship, so it would be not necessarily, I think, denying that she
Has one?
has one, but that we have the authority, I think, that we have to keep the system whole, or the board would have to keep the system whole, and that would be the basis of the denial, is just denying the appeal outright,
Has that been our consistent policy in other cases?
as far as I'm aware.
But I thought our policy contained a financial hardship basis for appeal. So if that's within our policy, but we're never going to do that because we have this other conflict within our policy, why do we tell the members you can appeal on the basis of financial hardship if that's not what we're ever going to consider?
Right, I understand. I think that's been an issue that we've looked at, is that it's there. However, we can't really consider that because of the Internal Revenue Code and the requirement to keep the system whole in our own board rules. Is that fair to say, Johnny?
I think that's fair to say. It's also, the city is not our only plan sponsor, and other plan sponsors have been more willing to cover overpayments or corrections. And so to take that out of the board's overall policy, maybe tying your hands too much.
Well, then I think maybe a distinction needs to be made somewhere so that when the members read our board policies on their appeals, they understand that, hey, if you're a city employee, you're not eligible for a financial hardship appeal because the city will not accept the cost associated with that appeal. It presents a real problem for me personally to tell our members you can appeal on financial hardship, but then when they get here we say, well, no, not really.
Well, they still can. Historically, the city has not approved
Right.
that financial hardship case.
So you mentioned earlier, Mark, that there have been occasions where we have gone to the city for a approval of financial hardship and a payment, and
We have, and
they've turned us
denied
down, and then we've gone ahead and waived the interest?
That is correct.
Okay, how many times have we done that, and is it always simply based on a case-by-case financial hardship analysis?
Well,
I don't need an exact now. I'm just saying.
I'm looking to my staff here.
Yeah.
I believe it's happened 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
The last 5 years.
The last case that I recall that happening in was a case where during the course of the appeal, the member passed away, and we didn't have the authority to collect anymore.
I do remember that.
So we asked the city said no, but at that point, we no longer had the authority to collect from the continuance of that member, and so that went into the UAL.
There
We
are
also
also
had a situation, there's been 2 since I've been here, we had a situation where we had a member who owed us money. There were collections being made on that money through city treasurers. The member stopped paying and subsequently passed away. And there's nowhere to get the money from because there are no next of kin, there's nothing left out there. And so that one also was uncollected. And we did specifically ask the city in the annual letter I send them where I list different things we asked them to pay for. We specifically asked them and they specifically said, no, we will not pay it. So then,
So we don't have a recent precedent that where someone has a financial hardship but is otherwise, still alive and well, but has a financial hardship.
to my knowledge, we haven't had a situation where there has been a request for consideration due to financial hardship, and that member was still, or that person, whether a member or beneficiary continuance, was still receiving
Benefits.
payments from the trust fund. So if they're not receiving payments from the trust fund, we don't really have a way to, we can, that one member, we did send it over to Treasurer's Collection, as I said, and they collected for a while, and then the payment stopped. But if there's not an income stream coming from the system, then it's difficult for us to collect, other than going to court, and I'll defer to Johnny on that, but that's my understanding, is that at that point, then we would have to go through the legal channels to get the monies.
Cynthia had something.
I was just going to add just one thing. Not sure if it's directly answering that question, but in November, we reported to you that we had asked the city to waive part or all of the payment on Miss Jan Hewlett, and the city denied that request, which was based on hardship. So that was a recent one where the member is still living and has resolved that. And I believe Alan's point is simply that one of the pieces of that decision-making team has changed.
Correct.
All right. Any further discussion? I think we need our buttons. So the motion's been made, but there's no second. A second has now been made.
Ready to vote?
All right, so the vote here is 2-2. In light of that, I think it goes to tomorrow's board meeting without recommendation.
That's correct.
All right. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, Val. Could I just ask for not an actual break, but just a 2-minute pause as we switch between these members, because I need to speak to two members very quickly.
You can, in fact, why don't we take a 5-minute break and we'll come back.
Thank you.
All right. And we're back in session and ready to proceed with item number 6, which is staff's recommendation to deny the appeal of Robert Mulcahy. And I'd like to call on Susan Youngflesh. Following her presentation, Mr. Mulcahy has submitted a speaker slip and some additional documents, so we'll move over to him.
Probably
Thank
doesn't
you.
have it on.
Mr. Mulcahy's final average salary was overstated by $141.05, which caused benefits to be overpaid since January of 2003. He has paid the principal, but he appeals the interest, which is approximately $8,000 to date. The system is required to be made whole, and therefore SDCERS must recoup the interest, and staff recommends denying Mr. Mulcahy's appeal.
Thank you. Mr. Mulcahy?
That's correct. I did repay the principal. Thank you. That is correct. I was overpaid. I don't understand the nuances of the accounting system of the board. If they allege an overpayment, I repaid the overpayment. I didn't ask for any loan, so I don't feel I should have to pay interest on a mistake that somebody else made. It's a matter of transferring negligence from the party that made the mistake to the party that's innocent and was not aware of it. I repaid the principal. I'm contesting just the interest issue.
All right. Is this a hardship-based appeal, or is it more of a equity-based appeal?
No, it's a legal appeal.
All
It's
right.
negligence, and I was not the negligent party.
Ms. Youngflesh, would you like to respond to that at all?
I almost said, Your Honor.
She's definitely talking to you.
I believe that we addressed what occurred in the report, and that his final average salary was overstated because he entered in the middle of the drop period. That specifically has been rectified in that now the applicant has to enter, we no longer allow them to enter in the middle of their pay period for a drop. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, but I do not have a response as to the direct allegations in Mr. Mulcahy's.
So the information I was looking for is whether staff believes that our board policy would allow us to waive interest under circumstances not of hardship, but of circumstances where the overpayment was due to staff error.
I believe the board has the authority to do what they feel is just under the board rules. However, there is nothing specific allowing the board to waive the interest as far as I'm aware. But I again would ask Johnny if he's aware of any other board rule that would allow that.
I talk too much here. Again, you passed a policy on overpayments, and that is we'll make the system whole and follow the IRS correction guidelines. So in doing so, you got to make the system whole, and the IRS has clarified that includes interest. So you do have competing duties here. You've got a duty to the membership as a whole as your fiduciary duty, and making sure that we pay the correct benefits and we collect the money that we've overpaid so we can continue paying benefits and invest that money. On the other side, you have to administer the system as best you can given the errors that inevitably happen.
Tom?
Dick Wilkin and I have spoken about this over the last couple of years.
Tom, could you turn your microphone on, please?
Or not?
Dick Wilkin and I spoke about this over the last couple of years, that there had to be some type of solution. Mr. Mulcahy succinctly put it exactly as Dick and I have been saying it for over the last couple of years. And if there is an employee that's a city employee that makes a mistake, and then you transfer the error and punish the member that's the recipient, I just feel that there's an error. And the only fallback I've always heard is there's the IRS guidelines that hold us to that.
And this is, on my personal opinion, is that we're not loaning them the money, but they've had the benefit of that money over that extended period of time, which they could have invested and also received interest. And so, in turn, we've lost the opportunity of having interest since 2003 when this occurred for that period of time. And therefore, that's what makes it fair in that sense.
I understand the point that if it's not punishment or a penalty, it is recoupment of the opportunity cost of having the cash. I get that. So economically, you're absolutely right. The trouble with this, I think, from the board's perspective, is that the imputed interest rate that we use for this isn't the interest rate that we all get when we put our money in a savings account. It's considerably higher. That's what the rub is in all these. But I also understand that because that's the interest rate that we use as our target rate of return, that's our interest rate that we expect to earn and as a system, and therefore, if we're going to be made whole, that's the interest rate we have to use. What I was hoping was that there was a clear policy answer that would say, no, we passed a policy that said under no circumstances can we do this except in a case of hardship. Well, I'm not hearing that. And so I think, Mr. Mulcahy has a point. It's a good point. But the system has a leak in it somewhere. And I'm uncomfortable with the idea that we can continually add the leaking air into the ark. I just don't like that as a policy. I understand, why some people would do that, and they seem like small leaks. But, small leaks add up, and there's a principle to the matter. So I'm very uncomfortable with both answers. Any further comments or discussion on this? Oh, Alan, you're up.
So I have a couple points I'd like to make on this. The concept of a staff error or an error by the city or someone here that causes a hardship or causes an overpayment on a member, unfortunately has been well litigated, at least on my time on this board, where mistakes, the liability for mistake, where does it land, who pays for it, and it's been well litigated, quite painfully, I'll add. And consistently, it falls back to the member, unfortunately. And I like to make a point that this system fought on behalf of the members so that it would not fall to the members over and over again, and we've consistently lost in court on that position. The second point I like to make is the interest rate. Now, we have a philosophical conflict here at SDCERS on how we apply interest rates. And the example I'll use is we charge the discount rate or our assumed investment return rate to corrections, regardless of how long that correction had gone on. Well, the philosophical approach to determining that rate is it's a long-term investment rate. It is a long-term investment rate. However, when it comes to drop accounts, we don't give that same long-term investment rate because it's only a short-term investment. And so we significantly reduce that investment rate when we credit drop accounts. So we have a philosophical approach to interest rates when it comes to benefiting the system, right? We use a long-term rate because we have long-term investments, and we use a short-term rate to credit drop accounts because we're only investing that money for 5 years, and they only get the benefit of an interest rate that's commensurate with a 5-year investment. So when we have a correction, and not getting the details of the timeliness of Mr. Mulcahy's correction, we apply that long-term rate to all corrections, regardless of how long it's gone on or how long the system's been short that money. So this is where I get challenged on the interest charges for some of these overcorrections, because the interest rate being applied is not consistent with our other philosophies regarding interest rates. So I'm struggling with Mr. Mulcahy because his benefit has not been a consistent long-term overpayment. Some of it goes back many years, some of it only goes back last year. So how do we apply a 7+% interest rate on an overpayment that occurred last month? That doesn't seem to make sense to me. And I know I may be creating a discussion that's going to create a whole lot more process in how we calculate these things, but philosophically, I have trouble charging Mr. Mulcahy on 7% interest on an overpayment he received 2 months ago.
But his overpayments go date back to January 2003.
Well, correct. So those are an interest rate that would apply to that time frame, but the one he received in 2016 is not a long-term rate.
And I appreciate your point. The policy states that the interest rate that will be charged is at the time that the overpayment is resolved. So what that means is not just the principal, but the complete resolution of the principal and the interest. So that's, by way of the policy, the interest rate that is chosen.
Right. No, but I understand, and I'm not criticizing staff for this. This is a policy of the board that I've got a problem with. It's not a policy of staff.
I think we should talk to the board president about it.
So I guess aside from this conversation on Mr. Mulcahy, I would like to have a discussion about what interest rate are we using for corrections, because I don't think the long-term investment rate, assumed investment rate, is the appropriate rate for all corrections. So,
Mr. Tran, you're next in the queue.
Thank you. Val, I'd like to address 2 points, one made by Tom and then the other point made by Alan. Tom, you had brought up that the reason for the corrections you keep hearing is only the IRS correction guidelines. So there's also case law on it. The cases, the courts in California are very clear that the pension board has a responsibility to correct errors it finds. So in this case, no doubt this board has a duty to correct Mr. Mulcahy's benefit prospectively, one, and that's not an issue. The question, a little bit more unclear that Val pointed out, is what do you do with the overpayment situation? And again, the board does have a fiduciary duty to make the system whole. It also has a fiduciary duty to protect the tax qualified status of all of its members, not just Mr. Mulcahy's unique situation. So you've got those competing interests, and the law does allow some flexibility in overpayments in situations where it was a mistake. But again, it's a limited exception. That's a Court of Appeal case, and it could have exceptions other places. So that's one case. To Alan's point, what interest rate should we use? The board's policy says we should use for corrections, the assumed rate of return for interest. That didn't come out of thin air. That came out of the IRS's recommendations for it. So the IRS allows different variations of that, but one of the rates, and perhaps the easiest one to use, is the assumed rate of return applied to valuations. So that's where the interest rate came from.
If we picked some other index or basis for an interest rate that was a lower interest rate, would we be at risk of running afoul of the IRS guidelines, or would we be able to go to the IRS and seek some determination? Could we get tax counsel's opinion on it?
Yeah, we've asked tax counsel, or I have personally asked tax counsel if we could have a simpler version or less. 2 points to make there. One, that's not under the IRS correction guidelines, so they recommended against finding a lower interest rate given the system wouldn't be made whole. Two, this board used to have a policy of requiring only 2% interest on overpayments, and the city attorney threatened a lawsuit for that, and as a result,
Mr. Mulcahy involved in that?
he was not personally.
don't answer that, Mr.
Threatened lawsuit.
I exercise my right to remain silent.
So the city attorney threatened a lawsuit against SDCERS, and after seeking legal advice, the board changed it to the current policy.
Okay.
You know, I look at it as a matter of responsibility, okay? Mr. Mulcahy sat down and he got told this is what your benefit is. And then the rug gets pulled out from underneath him several years later. And we're sitting here saying that, okay, we made a mistake, but the responsibility to make it whole falls solely on him. And he did nothing wrong. So whose responsibility is it? It's not his. His responsibility is to overpay what he received. The interest rate that was supposed to be done there, the mistake was done by us. And I think, regardless of what you've told me in the front, and what you say, I agree. But it's not his responsibility. I've felt that way for years. That when we make a mistake, it falls on us. And the city constantly says, nope, not going to happen. And to me, that's very, very frustrating. To sit here and watch an error be made, and we go, it's your responsibility to fix it. And it's ours.
If I may add that real quick, Val.
Sure.
I recognize the frustration, Tom. I'm dealing with 2 litigated cases where we have corrected benefits, including the interest. The member has filed a lawsuit to challenge that. There was no evidence that it was any fault of the members. And the Superior Court affirmed that we have a duty to correct and that we did it correctly. So I do respect that, but I do think the law recognizes this board's duty to protect the trust fund's assets, even sometimes in difficult situations like overpayments.
One last comment. I think the policy is clear and the way that we've implemented it has been consistent, and I find it impossible to distinguish this circumstance from the past ones where we've taken the action of charging the interest and collecting the interest. It's not even a hardship case, whereas the last one was, and I think it's too risky to the system to justify taking a different approach on this appeal here today in terms of embroiling us in any kind of problem with the IRS or in any kind of litigation or anything like that. I think that if the board wants to have a different policy, we need to do a top-to-bottom full review of the policy and then apply it consistently. So for that reason, I'm going to vote to deny the appeal, even though I'm certainly sympathetic to the problem and agree that it's a conundrum that deserves our attention, and we should probably explore it again. I know we did as a board 2 or 3 years ago have a long meeting about really devoted to this. I think we should do it again. So those are my comments.
And so real quickly, I agree with Val on a couple points here. Where I'm going to disagree with Val is I think my recommendation would be to table Mr. Mulcahy's appeal until such time we review our interest rate policy on overpayments. But I understand that he still could be subject to whatever the result of that policy. So process-wise, I'm not sure how that works, but for a long time I've been uncomfortable with the interest rate that we're charging on overpayments. And it hasn't been until this meeting where I've really been able to articulate it well. So I apologize for that delay, but I truly think that had Mr. Mulcahy received $7,000 back in 2003, I think 7 1/8 might be the right interest rate. But he didn't receive over $7,000 back in 2003. He received that money at $140 or whatever it was per paycheck.
$141.
Or that was his salary, so that it was based upon. So he received that money over that period of time. Like I said, some of that money he just received last month. So to charge him that rate for that, to me, seems inappropriate. And I think we'd stay within guidelines of the IRS and making our system whole, because we're assuming that we had that money the whole time when we established that interest rate, and we have not. So.
All right. I think there's no one in the queue, so if we have buttons, we'll.
Do we need to do a motion to table? Or
So I would actually defer to Mr. Mulcahy at this point if he would be, if motioning to table your appeal is something.
Interest will run.
Interest will still run depending on what policy is determined.
I would concur in that motion to table it for further reconsideration, review it, and then go forward.
Actually, interest isn't running because the principal is repaid, right?
The principal's been repaid.
principal's
for
been
quite a
repaid.
while. Immediately, I repaid.
We don't charge
principal.
interest on interest, do we?
Yes.
Do we? We do.
Yes. Yes.
Oh,
We have
I think
compound
we have
interest
new,
here.
yeah, we have new microphones, and I'm struggling with turning this on off. So there's no longer interest accruing on the principal, but he still owes us the interest, and yes, interest does accrue on that.
Yes.
So it does continue to accrue.
I thought for some reason on these we didn't, but okay.
So, I mean, would a motion to table for further consideration be acceptable to you, Mr. Mulcahy?
Would be acceptable, and I'd also like to caveat that any interest on this pending matter be stayed pending appeal.
So I don't know if the committee or staff would recommend a staying of interest, because that becomes a problem within our funding policy and IRS guidelines. That's why I think we could get a motion to table, but I don't think the interest accrual would be stayed completely. But I think there's an opportunity to recalculate the interest owed based on an interest rate policy review for overpayments. So,
Alan, if that's the course we're going to take, shouldn't we establish a time frame for having that review or set up some parameters right now so it's not just?
I agree. I would like to do that as well, but it's not within this topic on the agenda. So that would come up. That could come up in board comments or trustee comments at the end to bring forward an interest rate review at the next meeting.
Another complication of the suggestion is that it could implicate all pending corrections that we are still working on and have yet to work on, which could
Correct.
mean that you now have a growing list of
Not-
overpayments that are not
Creates a
getting
sense of urgency
resolved.
on the development of the policy. I agree.
Not to mention Mrs. Toomey from earlier today, but yeah, all the
The
others.
only fact that has changed is that we have a different city attorney, but there's a lot of legal cases. There are opinions written by past city attorneys, which are all adverse to changing anything in our current policy.
Right.
I wasn't going to vote for the motion to table. I was going to vote against it, but I would just suggest that if what we want to do is defer while we think about this further and not take any action, then it seems to me the appropriate thing to do would be to do what we did 3 or 4 months ago and ask staff to write to the city attorney and request that the city pay the interest and wait until the next meeting when we have the city's response, which is going to be a denial.
And in that same time frame.
And in the same time frame, try and take the issue up. And if we're going to do that, then I think what we'll end up doing is doing that on Mrs. Toomey as well, and when we get to the full board meeting tomorrow. Because I don't think we're, if that's what the board wants to do, it should be consistent.
And that sounds reasonable to me as well. I get that we're putting a lot of work on staff right now. But,
That's what staff
yeah.
does.
Yeah. Marcel, I see.
Yeah,
Sorry,
just-
Val, here.
That's good. Just one clarification that the interest would continue to run. There is the option, though, if Mr. Mulcahy were to pay the interest, that would stop the clock on additional interest. And if the board policy then was amended in such a way that there was a different interest rate or different outcome, we would refund to Mr. Mulcahy with
All right,
interest.
what's the mechanics of that? He pays it under protest or something?
He pays it with his appeal still. We have people who have done this in the
Provision for
past.
that.
They
Okay.
pay up front because they don't want the interest to continue to
I
accrue
understand.
while they continue their appeal. Once the board denies the appeal, then at that point, we wouldn't be making any refunds because you've denied the appeal and that it stands. But if the decision is to put the appeal on hold in lieu of a potential change to the policy, then at that point, because the appeal has not concluded, if he were to pay, then we would refund.
Understood. Thank
And
you.
that goes for principal amounts as well. I mean,
Excellent.
If we,
Excellent
if we
point.
end up with a different result through the appeal and determine that the principal, I'm not saying that's Mr. Mulcahy's case, I'm just saying in general, if we determined that the principal was calculated incorrectly of what the overpayment was, then we would refund as well.
Okay, got it.
And on how frequently is the interest compounded on these accounts?
Monthly.
Monthly. Okay.
All righty.
Table? Motion to table then?
Well, I think Alan would like to make a motion at this point.
Yeah, so I would like to change staff's recommendation on the motion. I would like to make a motion to table. Or wait a second, are we going to go down the other path
I
of
think
requesting the city?
the other way is better.
Okay.
Yeah, ask the city to,
So we won't, so I guess the process, we won't vote on this motion and give direction back to staff to request the interest from the
Right.
city.
Right, and we had a similar motion a few months ago. I don't know if Cynthia has easy access to that, but
I don't know if we need a motion at this point, if we're not going to.
Right.
Just refer staff to
just
ask
refer
the
to
city
staff.
Right.
It-
But we
Comment
have
on
to take
the
a vote
interest.
on that, don't we?
I don't,
Last time, we did not take a vote on it, which meant that it didn't get out of committee, so it didn't go to the full board until we came back with the letter from the city.
correct.
All right, so with the understanding that, that Mr. Mulcahy has the option to pay the interest and stop the running of interest without forfeiting his position, which is good, then I will go along with that proposal, that we go back to the plan sponsor again and find out if we get a different answer.
Okay?
Is Cynthia waving?
Is there a way now to go back to Mrs. Twomey, or do we leave it alone? There was no recommendation on that. I would prefer to have both of them come out with the same recommendation, and I know that may not be the best thing for getting everything resolved quickly, but I don't want to see a different result.
We can make that tweak at board tomorrow, because that was 2-2.
Yeah, we've dealt with
So we don't
Toomey
need,
today, but you could revisit that tomorrow.
okay,
Yeah, because effectively is going before the board tomorrow without a recommendation from committee.
okay. Then I think this motion to approve staff's recommendation to deny the appeal of Robert Mulcahy put the buttons up, but I don't think we have a mover. I just want to give anybody the opportunity, if they want to make this motion, to make the motion. No one's making the motion, and we've referred it to staff to come back to us after asking the city if the city will pay the interest portion on Mr. Mulcahy's overpayment. Okay? Then that brings us to new business. Thank you, Mr. Mulcahy.
Do we get a new hearing date, or do we get notified when this recommendation is made?
Yes, tomorrow, we'll have a full board meeting, and we'll do this again. And the full board will, no, does this even come to the full board now?
It'll get pulled out of consent for you to talk about.
So I'll talk about it tomorrow morning at the full board meeting, which starts at 8:30. And a motion could be made by a board member to approve staff's recommendation or to take some other action. So if you'd like to be here tomorrow, I would recommend that. And then after that, if the board approves the reference that was made today, I'm sure staff will copy you on their correspondence with the city and the city's response, and it'll come back before the board at a future meeting, and you get notice of that.
I'd just like to know the date of the future meeting. I appreciate that.
I'm not sure we know yet because we don't have an answer from the city,
Okay.
but
Thank you very much.
it'll probably be March.
Yeah, I would think so, yeah.
Thank you.
All righty. Thank you. On to new business, no action requested. Johnny Tran on trustees on the audit committee.
Yeah, thank you, Val. We've discussed this item with the audit committee, and both the audit committee and staff don't think there is a concern, but we wanted to make sure the board is in agreement. So the audit committee charter states in part that each committee member shall be both independent and knowledgeable of financial reporting issues. The word independent is a term of art within our board, in that sometimes mayoral appointees such as you, Val, are called independent members or independent trustees because you're not a member of SDCERS. Historically, the audit committee, though, has had member trustees on the audit committee. Both Steve Meyer and Mark Sullivan were both on the audit committee. So we just wanted to make sure, given the two vacancies that are happening, that will happen at the audit committee, that there wasn't any confusion or disagreement that a member trustee could sit on the audit committee.
All right.
That's it. It's a no action item.
No action
so
item.
Unless there's a question, we can move on.
Anyone want to? Okay. Then next we have staff's review of the Port District and Airport Authorities reporting of pensionable compensation under PEPRA. And again, Johnny.
Thank you. So pensionable compensation is used to calculate a member's retirement benefit, and PEPRA, the Public Employee Pension Reform Act, limited what can be reported to SDCERS as pensionable pay for port and airport PEPRA members. So with the assistance of the internal auditor, the legal division reviewed what is being reported to SDCERS as pensionable pay for those two member groups and determined that both the port and airport are largely in compliance with it. My report notes 3 potential areas that the port could violate it, but we didn't find any actual violations. So I want to thank Lee for assisting me with that and bringing that to my attention.
All right, thank you. Third item under new business is update on trustee elections. Jessica Packard.
Nice to see all of you. SDCERS successfully held its first ever online election, and we're happy to have Tom Battaglia as our new active general trustee. And what's significant to note about this whole new process is that basically we haven't had an active general trustee election over the past 6 years because we haven't received enough nominations. So this new process has really encouraged participation from our members because we almost had about 10 people interested in running for the position. Moving forward, we have 3 term dates coming to an end at the end of March. Those include Tom Battaglia, Jeff Wallace, and our own Alan. And those are 2 active general trustees and the active fire safety trustee. A call for nominations will be sent out this month. Pending on the amount of nominations received, we will be holding an election. And with that, I will take any questions you may have. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That brings us to old.
Tom
Yes,
is
Mark.
in the audience, just listening in today. So he was at a disability committee meeting this morning and will be at a full board meeting tomorrow.
Welcome aboard. Thank you. Yes, you'll be going by Thomas or TB, by the way. Okay. So it's not, we have a Tom.
Seniority matters.
All right, under old business action requested, staff's recommendation to review the overpayment of benefits and underpayment of contributions policies. Johnny Tran.
Yeah, we've had a full discussion about this already, and actually
Okay.
the item that we brought in November squarely fits Alan's concerns and what he brought in one of the appeal cases that you heard today. In November, staff had tried to address the concern or problem or misconception that members have with the overpayments appeals policy in where financial hardship comes into play. As you know, the IRS correction guidelines allow SDCERS to consider financial hardship in situations so long as they get the money from somewhere else, namely the plan sponsor. But that option isn't on the table when the plan sponsor is unwilling to pay that. So in November, staff had recommended that we take out that language. This committee was uncomfortable with that and sought clarification as opposed to taking that out. I've done my best to try to clarify it without tying your hands further. Given that this committee is interested in overhauling this policy, I don't know if they want to approve this recommendation or wait for a more robust discussion that would include the interest component and other components.
Well, I don't see anyone in the queue, but I see nodding heads. So my belief is that the committee members present today would probably defer to a more full discussion, any action on the revisions that are now before us. I don't know, without conferring with the board president, when and how we're going to have that discussion. We do have a retreat coming up with another agenda entirely, as I understand it.
Yeah, I suspect that a further discussion of this policy would take a significant amount of time, which would not be available in the board retreat. So the earliest we could bring this back before the board would be March. So I'll talk with staff about doing that.
In the meantime, if we do have the opportunity to seek guidance from the city on whether there's going to be any change in policy on their part, that could make our job a whole lot easier.
Correct.
Low probability, but great opportunity.
Right.
Would it be worthy of an ad hoc committee of the board to work with staff on developing this? That might expedite the process when we do get to board. Your thoughts?
I'm certainly open to that.
I mean, would you agree that this could make the discussion, an ad hoc committee of the board would make the discussion at full board a little more understandable? That way the board members aren't doing it so much trying to rewrite policy while sitting at the dais. Does that
Right.
make sense?
I have a question for my general counsel about whether we can form an ad hoc committee without the motion to form an ad hoc committee being on the agenda.
I think it's related enough to this policy that we've given the public enough that information that we were talking about this. So should the recommendation be to form an ad hoc committee versus amend it, I think I'm okay with that.
Okay, so you could bring that up tomorrow if you want.
Okay.
You'd have to ask for volunteers or appoint members of the board to be on that ad hoc committee,
Okay.
right?
Yes. What do you-
Well, if you're planning to raise that at the board meeting tomorrow, then perhaps we ought to discuss it here and make a recommendation on it.
I agree with that, Bill.
Right. I mean, what does the committee think of that concept of, because when we're talking about the timing issues, you know, I'm trying to avoid, like I said, rewriting the policy while sitting at the dais. So I think if there's an ad hoc committee put together, those committee members would be fully able to speak on whatever revisions come from as a recommendation from the ad hoc committee.
All right, so you catch me on the fly, off the cuff, but my thought off the cuff is that an ad hoc committee would make sense if there were something for the ad hoc committee to investigate, discover, learn, analyze, work with, and that was helpful to the board as a whole. But if we have staff who are going to do that and bring it to the board as a whole, then I'm concerned that an ad hoc committee may be nothing other than sort of a, I've heard the word rump caucus, but it means a small group that's not really in control of anything, trying to take over the parliamentary deliberative process. And I worry about that because people do have strong feelings about this issue, and I think everybody should be involved in the discussion. So I wouldn't want to see an ad hoc committee if all it's going to do is express its opinions in private caucus with staff in order to mold the policy, but the whole board then is going to be asked to consider it. I'd almost rather the whole board considered it based on staff's recommendation. That's just my feeling.
Right. Well, on the discussion of, you know, investigating something, I think there's, when it comes to like the interest rate discussion, that will be a very involved discussion.
It will, and I have ideas on that I would express right now, but I would do it in a committee and in public. I wouldn't necessarily. I don't see the reason for an ad hoc committee because I don't think there's anything for the committee to do other than express opinions, which we can all do.
Okay.
For example, on interest, my opinion is the interest rate should be something between 0 and what it presently is, but not as high. I would love for it not to be quite so high, but to make it more reflective of what a member's benefit really is rather than what the cost to the system is, because there's a gap between the member's benefit and the system's cost, and I'd like to have that be more at the member's benefit than at the system's cost. But I think we need to fill the hole, and so I would be going to the city and saying, look, if we get 2% for the members, will you pay the other 5%? You know, and negotiating something with the city along. I mean, that's what I would like to see happen.
Right.
But I don't know how going.
Right. No, that's, we're having this conversation now. I was trying to have it at committee,
Right.
but because I would disagree with that
I'd put it on
characterization about the
TV.
cost of the system. Yes, because when you put it in the concept of the drop interest rate, the city has benefited tremendously over the past 5 years on the active drop interest rate. And there's no difference in exchange of money to make up for that difference. So I don't know if how you would characterize cost to the city or cost to the member. My interest is making the system whole without overcharging the member.
But to do that, Alan, wouldn't you have to go back and look at what the actual interest rate earned was during the period of time that the overpayments were being made, and then calculate you could calculate an actual cost to the system, which might be higher than the imputed interest rate. It might be lower, but historically it would be higher.
You're right, we could, and we've had that conversation because now we look more like a DC plan than a DB plan, and that's part of the challenge here.
There's
when it comes-
IRS guidance on the
Yes.
same thing. Can
Yeah.
you use your actual earnings rather than the assumed rate of earnings?
Right.
And the answer is yes, you can. It gets considerably more complex to do that. So the IRS guidelines said it's much more administratively simple to use the assumed rate of return if over time that's what you earn anyway.
But we could, for example, have a policy that said we will use the lesser of.
In which case you'd have to collect the interest from some other member to be consistent with IRS guidelines. And we have had a policy where we tried to collect the balance from the city and they said no. But we're, again, happy to re-queue up these issues and re-present the research that we've done on it and what our options are.
Okay. Well, just then I guess just to
Back to the
we haven't heard from
conversation
everybody
of
else.
the ad hoc committee.
Yeah, I'm just afraid that if we have an ad hoc committee and all these discussions take place in an ad hoc committee, we're in essence not shining the light on it. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it would make more sense to sit and brainstorm with a small committee.
So I would look to staff, Mark, Johnny, at this point on your thoughts on an ad hoc committee and doing our brainstorming at that level versus time at the dais. The decisions would still be fully discussed at the board, at committee and board, but that brainstorming component, is that really what I was looking for is, where is that best appropriately done?
Well, another option we could consider is just asking the board to provide direct input to Johnny and myself on the issues that you would like us to specifically address at a March presentation to the board.
Okay.
You know,
There's yet another option or two, one of which is to squeeze an hour out of our retreat and even schedule a follow-up retreat to address whatever we don't get done in this one, or to extend our retreat by 2 hours or something and actually have a full board discussion in February. I think it's a huge opportunity that we don't want to miss for the sake of sticking with the plan if we can accommodate everything.
Right.
Just, I know that's
I
throwing you a
think
wrench,
this topic kind of fits in with what we've talked about for retreat when it comes to funding and actuarial stuff, actuarial determinations. So it kind of fits.
What are the hours that we have set up for the retreat right now?
That's about 17 hours long at this point.
right now is 8:30 to 1:30.
So we could, those who want to brainstorm on this could come at 7:30, and everybody else could come at 9, and we'd have an hour and a half to kick it around.
Well, the retreat is technically a publicly noticed meeting, so if board members
We'd
were
have to
come
give
in-
notice.
Show
Right.
it at a 7:30 start time.
Right.
Do we have time to give that notice, though, still?
Certainly.
Yes.
So, just an idea.
I'm up at 5, so it doesn't.
I'm up before 5.
Tom, what do you think?
Well,
Doesn't matter to me. I'll sleep when I'm dead.
who said that?
I have no idea.
Sounds like Oscar Wilde.
And so back to my ad hoc committee idea. I'm completely accepting of the idea of starting the retreat an hour early for those that are interested in the interest rate discussion.
And maybe we skip the part where we go around the circle and say, what kind of animal would you be if you could be an animal?
I like that part.
That was not in the plans anyway. But I received good constructive suggestions regarding that following last board retreat. Yes.
Well, I value the retreat because I always learn a lot about the different board members and staff at the retreat, which it's a so. Okay, so let's do that. So we'll start the retreat
at 7:30.
7:30
Yep.
For the interest rate discussion. And I will withdraw my concept of an ad hoc committee.
Okay.
in lieu of that. Okay.
Great, thank you very much. That was very constructive.
Yeah.
So next, we have the discussion regarding data security and data breach cyber insurance. And again, Mr. Tran.
Thank you, Val. So last year, you directed staff to work with Barney and Barney and look at the possibility of purchasing data breach cyber insurance. So here we have Brad hearing from Barney and Barney. And Brad, thank you for sitting through all this and
Morning.
forcefully learning about public pension law.
Broadening my horizons.
We have a PowerPoint presentation for you, and I'd like to walk through it. Turn to the first page there, Brad. So before we discuss whether or not you'll be recommending to the board to purchase data liability insurance, I wanted the board to understand what happens now. Currently, we have no data breach cyber liability insurance, but that doesn't mean we're not working our tails off to protect the system. The bullet points highlight what we're doing to protect the system in case of a data breach. We've got constant updates and efforts by SDCERS to secure our electronic and online presence. Dave Bond and other staff provide frequent staff training on preventing cyber data breaches. We coordinate our security with the city's IT security division, who has a designated security officer to protect the city, and through that, SDCERS as well. We are a member of the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which provides us essentially free forensic experts to deal with an emergency. Phone calls, figure out what happened, figure out how to reverse engineer it, fix a problem, and learn from other people's incidences. We have weekly testing by the U.S. Homeland Security. We have submitted an RFP for an outside risk assessment of our IT division. And we have a documented process for the event of a data breach. So we are fully on top of our IT security. With that said, you can't protect everything. That's why people sell insurance and people buy it. You'll click next button. Thank you. So in looking at purchasing insurance, we've looked at a few things. We've researched potential liability indemnification issues. We've analyzed the maturity of the cyber insurance market, research industry trends. On that topic, I'd like to point out we did an informal survey of Caliper Systems, and out of the 16 respondents, we've learned that 7 have purchased some type of cyber insurance. Notably, the 7 that have purchased are systems that are smaller than SDCERS with less resources. Maybe they don't have a Dave Bond. Maybe they don't have me who would help internally deal with any data breach. But something to note. But some larger systems are looking at potentially purchasing cyber insurance. And the last thing is we've analyzed the types of coverage and obtained quotes regarding types of cyber insurance. That's where Barney and Barney came in. Next slide, Brad. So the cyber insurance quote, I didn't want to list this online, but you have the printed document in front of you, and that was part of the materials. That breaks down the types of coverage that comprise what data in cyber insurance generally means. We're looking at $10 million in aggregate liability insurance with a premium of $75,500 plus 3.2% in fees. If you have questions about the coverage amount, the breakdown of the insurance, Brad could answer those questions. Next slide. So what's the option today is you can either purchase insurance or you can be doing exactly what we're doing today, or alternatively, you can tell staff to continue self-insuring, not buy, purchase, and do additional steps. One, if you don't buy insurance, you will continue to rely on in-house, the city and MISACIT expertise to deal with any potential breach. We could also reach out to retain a law firm, a public relations firm, or other vendors to help us in case of a breach. So put experts on retainers that we would know about, that we could call in a moment's notice in case we had such a breach.
So what is our existing, I mean, we're a $7 billion fund, and we're looking at it seems low.
75,500?
Yeah. Well, no, I'm talking about what our potential losses are in a cyber breach. How is it identified?
Oh, how is 10 million identified as aggregate liability?
Yeah.
Brad, you can speak to that better than I can.
Yeah, we did some benchmarking analysis that I will caveat a little bit in a second here. But it gave us a range of as much as we could get to a group of peers in a similar size by looking at total current and past member size, as well as total assets under management. And the $10 million limit fell within the bottom sort of range of what we found peers to be purchasing. And the caveat is that it needed to be expanded further than just public sector money managers to encompass enough of a peer group. So we did include some private sector purchasers in that analysis also.
Tom,
Go ahead.
if it helps a little to make it relative, the city has purchased cyber insurance for 20 million, and they're pretty big. The port, 20 million, the airport, 10 million. So staff is comfortable with the 10 million aggregate amount.
So I'm going to step back a little bit. What would be the effect of a cyber breach? What could happen to us if we were breached? What do our losses look like? Are we going to lose assets of the fund? Are we going to subject to litigation costs because we didn't take adequate steps to protect the members' assets in litigation? What if there's a member from within SDCERS staff that decides to engage in some criminal conduct and allow a breach to occur? What are we protecting, and how are we protected by the insurance?
Sure. So we'll start with what's being protected, and it really is personally identifiable, non-public information or data. That's why we try to actually steer away from the phrase cyber, because it can be a little bit of a misnomer. It really is data that is of key importance here. So the assets in the fund would be a different issue.
Okay.
It would be the information that you hold for the members and other non-public, personal information like that that's of concern.
So if there was a cyber breach and somehow funneled assets out of the fund by redirecting a benefit someplace, that would not necessarily be protected here.
Correct.
Okay.
And to your point about an insider or an SDCERS employee or somebody like that, those types of situations that would cause a breach are included within the scope of the cyber insurance. And that's to Johnny's point. We've seen the strongest IT systems in the world experience breaches of scope that you can't necessarily prepare for. And some of that does include somebody who has followed the correct protocol and the system has worked, but they have access to the inside and decide to do something with it that you can't predict. So that is absolutely a cause of loss that we have seen. The human factor, whether it's unintentional error by, sending something to the wrong person or losing a device or something like that, or something more malicious than that.
Okay. But the point, I appreciate that, is we're protecting the personal information data.
Correct.
That could be used.
Names and social
Names
security
and social security
numbers.
numbers, birth dates, that could be used to create identity theft and lead members of their other assets.
Correct.
Okay.
And the costs associated with that.
And the costs associated with
regulatory
the-
actions against us, lawsuits, notifying the members, things like that. I don't know of a product that someone sells insurance for actual loss of assets. So if someone stole money from Wells Fargo,
And that was to help to clarify.
A lot more than.
Right, exactly. To Tom's point, I mean, we have a $7 billion fund. We're not trying to protect the assets. We're trying to protect the.
Well, the security over those assets is a whole lot more robust than meets the
Right.
eye.
Right. But yeah, to your point, it would be costs associated with responding to and
data breach,
undergoing and correcting a data breach.
Okay.
Yeah, and to Johnny's point, the liability side of it is, I guess, uncertain could be the best word. If you respond properly and have good security protocol in place, the likelihood that you experience a lawsuit is lower, but costs associated with responding to and mitigating a breach is what every entity that experiences a data breach goes through. And those are the things that Johnny mentioned, the notification of the individuals whose information was compromised, and that can get complex because privacy law is dictated at the state level. So there are numerous different versions of that privacy law that dictate how you respond to those individuals and under what time frame. That can get fairly costly to dig into. Providing credit monitoring services, we've probably all seen similar notices for our banks or our insurance companies or whomever that have had breaches. And then, like Johnny mentioned, the legal fees and potential forensic analysis to determine the scope of the breach and who is required to be notified because whose information got accessed. And then there is the cyber extortion coverage component that I think Johnny mentioned briefly, which we've probably seen in the news lately as well, which is a system being shut down or held hostage, essentially, with an quote-unquote ransom note, if you will, saying that we've encrypted your data and won't release it until you pay us X number of dollars or Bitcoin or whatever.
Thank you. I have a question for Johnny. At this point, the motion is to approve a discussion. So can you go over once again exactly what you're asking us to do?
Sure, we don't have an actual motion or recommendation by staff. I think the language really is discussion regarding data and breach.
There's no motion.
There actually is no motion.
So this is not an action item.
It is an action item should the committee decide to, but we did not have a recommendation either which way.
Why is that?
I think, well, it's a cost-benefit analysis, and I think different opinions differ. Simply, we think it is definitely within your fiduciary duty and prudent to purchase insurance if you do so, and not so if you don't.
I'd like a staff recommendation.
Okay.
I'll chime in on this. It's difficult to say that you don't want to protect members' data. Of course we do. We try very hard to protect members' data. To say that we're not concerned about cyber risk is also not true. We are very concerned about that. We have, as Johnny pointed out, a procedure in place to ensure in the event of a data breach that we've got sample letters set up, communications with the members, communications with credit rating agencies. We have a fairly robust process in place, and we do a whole lot of things already to control our cyber risk. So Johnny indicated that we reached out to other calipers pension systems, of which there are 40. We had responses from 15 or 16. Those that have insurance are smaller than us. I would argue that our peers do not have this insurance. The systems that have this insurance are systems that are smaller, that may have a staff of 4 or 5 who would be totally unprepared to be able to deal with any kind of a response and would obviously need help. I would assert that our staff would be in position to deal with a cyber breach if something like this were to happen. And again, our systems size, our systems our size and larger generally don't have it. So I think we should take this very seriously. We do take this very seriously. I think we should have a process in place in the event of a cyber breach. We do have a process in place for a cyber breach. My own personal opinion is that we don't need the insurance, but I don't want you to think that that means that I don't think we should protect our members' data. That's just not true.
Can I add something as well?
Sure, Dave.
We do actually have the assistance of the Department of Homeland Security. So this multi-state information sharing and analysis center is an adjunct of the Department of Homeland Security, and they will provide us emergency conference calls. They'll do forensic analysis. They'll come in with a Tiger team and help us with the event, mitigate any actions, recover our systems if we get to the point where we would actually need that kind of assistance. And that's all for free.
So if I understand correctly, we would be reasonable in not purchasing the insurance, but we don't want to be second-guessed if that turns out to be wrong and there's a cyber threat that comes to fruition. And so the board is basically being asked to take the heat on this one. And in that regard, there is no motion pending, so I think what we would do at this point is ask board members if anyone would like to make a motion to have further discussion on this subject between staff and insurance company and come back with a proposal for insurance, as opposed to no motion, discussion ends. We have this discussion again tomorrow, perhaps, but is that?
Yeah, well, we have.
Other than the part about the board taking the heat, is that?
No. We definitely don't want that. We think it's a fair discussion. I have talked extensively with Lacera, Lacers, CalSTRS. A lot of all those systems, I understand, decided not to purchase insurance at this time, and I do not think that they are taking this lightly.
So we're not separating ourselves from the herd by not doing it.
We are not.
understand.
And so the information we wanted to present to you was to give you this option. If you wanted to further mitigate a possible breach from a monetary standpoint, then insurance would be an option.
Okay.
Other than that, you currently self-insure, and with the assets that we have and the staff that we have, that is doable.
I understand
so
now. That's a
if-
much better presentation of the issue for us. And I think at that point, I would just ask if anybody on the board wants to make a motion on this topic. It would be in order.
If you did want insurance, we have a hard, firm quote.
This begs a question to me, and I'm sure that the analysis has been done. I would like a review of what we have done to protect our data. For me to make the leap to say, hey, we should buy insurance, be somehow, as a board member, accepting that, okay, we've done everything we can, and I still believe that we have an exposure. But I don't know if we've done everything we can. I don't know what that looks like. So if I could get some information or some report from IT or somebody that says, hey, this is what we do to protect all of our data, and this is a recommendation that we could do.
I think we did that. I think that was the first slide of the presentation.
In addition, though, Alan, we are having an IT risk assessment performed by a third party who's going to come in and make recommendations. And it's possible that they'll come in and recommend that we have cyber insurance.
Right. Okay. So in my analysis, my next is how do we compare to other systems and what they've done to protect their data? And to Val's point about being part of the herd, are we doing everything we can to protect our data in alignment with industry standards? And I assume that answer is yes, but haven't seen it specifically. So,
Why don't we
with
pull
that,
up?
with Val, I'm not ready to make a motion on this.
So let's pull up the first slide and just make sure that everybody's questions about that slide are answered, because I think that is what we do.
Right.
I believe I've heard that that is consistent with other systems of our size.
Yes, it is. In fact, we are, as far as I'm aware of, the participation in the Department of Homeland Security, that is not common among our peers. We are at the forefront of using the DHS.
Okay.
I see Lee has appeared magically in front of a microphone. You may have something to add here, Lee.
Any comment from our auditor?
One of the things that we discussed at two meetings subsequent at the audit committee level was assurances, outside assurances that you get, not from staff yourself, but from an outside party. We have mentioned a couple times that we are doing an outside risk assessment of the IT division. One of the other components was a cyber assessment vulnerability. That was tabled until we got an outside risk assessment of the IT division. If that IT risk assessment said we should go further and look at a cyber vulnerability assessment, that would be recommended at that time.
All right. So I think we've had a full discussion, and I would just ask if any committee member wants to make a motion that you speak now. And hearing none, I want to thank our speaker and Mr. Tran for vetting the issue with us, and we'll move on to the next item.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brad.
So we next have a report on overpayments to members exceeding $10,000. Marcel Rossman.
Hello. So you have my report. I wanted to point out that we've had 3 items that have been resolved since we last met that are reported to you here. And then since this report was done, we've had another item that's been resolved. So the very last member mentioned, Tracy Williams, has entered into a payment plan that will conclude before she is age eligible to retire. So she'll have her case taken care of. The other ones we are still continuing to work on. Ms. Toomey and Mr. Mulcahy are 2 of the ones listed on here, and you're aware of the status on those 2. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
In light of what we're doing with Mr. Mulcahy's case, is there anything we should talk about on any of the other pending ones?
That's a difficult question to answer because these are some different issues. They're not all benefit overpayments, right?
Right.
So some
Do
of
we have
them.
any other benefit overpayments where a staff error has resulted in a significant accumulation of, or accrual of interest that is being negotiated?
The first one under, still outstanding on the first page, Anna Martinez, that is one that is a benefit overpayment. The rest of the items on here are not benefit overpayments. They are, for the most part, contribution underpayments. Well, obviously not Ms. Toomey and Mr. Mulcahy, but Deborah Nasta, Stephen Sesueda, and Tracy Williams are all issues of underpayments of contributions.
And as for Ms. Martinez, she's in the process of appealing her correction, and so we're not under the gun to do anything.
Correct.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment? Great. Thank you very much. Next are our status reports, starting with the legal division.
Thank you. You have my report in front of you. I wanted to highlight two items. The board asked SDCERS staff to issue an RFP for tax compliance to review our tax compliance with IRS regulations concerning the pension plan. We received a response and we're negotiating with KPMG to help us review that compliance. Concerning the purchase of service credit cases that were remanded back to the Superior Court, those cases were consolidated with Joan Lewis, and a trial date set for August 25th of this year. I'll take any questions you may have, though. Thanks, Val.
There are no questions, so that moves us to information technology. David Bond. Thank you, Johnny.
In addition to my written report, we had lessons learned out of our disaster recovery exercise in October. One of those is that we did not have an emergency procurement provision, so that item was brought before you earlier in the meeting. The other is that we needed more detailed payroll process execution instructions. So we have added those details to our disaster recovery document, and we intend to run another event, a simulated event in March, and I will come back to you with the results of that activity. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
There's no one in the queue. Thank you very much. That brings us to member services and Cynthia Queen.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Thank you for reading my report. I just wanted to give a quick update on some great progress that we made from last year. In December, we did one of our annual mailings that went very smoothly. Members are accustomed to this. This is a Medicare verification request for about 3,000 retirees. Process went smoothly, but that is a large number of letters to send out. And in looking at the statistics on our phone calls, the number of calls went up by about 30% in December. Not only because of that, but definitely that was a major contributing factor. And with that going on, the wonderful call center team still kept that call wait time at 14 seconds, which I thought was really impressive when I looked at that. And it just shows, thank you, it just shows how with the concerted effort and focus on it, and with support from the board, anything can happen. And I would just like to give a special thank you to our supervisor, Shawnquana Pemberton, who's sitting in the back. Shaq does such a great job of monitoring this all the time and really just being a wonderful supporter and cheerleader for her team. I know we all appreciate her efforts, and thank you for all that you've shared with her. On the more unusual side, I wanted to note that we have a very smooth process in place when members are calling up for their usual retirement counseling appointments. All goes well. But we do have unusual and urgent situations that will arise. And unfortunately, we had another one this week where the port has a very serious issue with a member who has appears to be a terminal illness, and just as I'm thankful for the partnership that we have with our plan sponsors and with the great team we have in place, because I got a phone call in the morning. We had our 4 key team members, Marcel and I, Sandra, our disability manager, and Jerry Kapotic, our counselor, on the phone with the HR manager. we're at, Jerry Kapotic went out to the hospital yesterday and met with the member, which was their requested time, and now the team is working together to have the necessary paperwork for whatever may come from this process. And it's a tribute to the good relationship we have not only with our plan sponsors, but with the team as well, that we are always working in the best interest of members, sadly, sometimes in the more difficult situations, but that can be when it is most important. So I wanted to really thank Jerry and the team for that. And as we start out our new year here, of course, we're working towards accomplishing the items that are on our action plan for this fiscal year, and then looking at the goals that we're setting for next year. And staffs are all working on what we're looking forward to providing for our members. And the work that our team has done last year is certainly rolling through to this year and will come to great fruition, I hope, later on in the year. And we're going to have some very cool tools that we're going to be rolling out to members, particularly online and on our member portal. And I've mentioned this before in my reports, but today I have the opportunity to thank someone who is usually too busy working to come down here. In the back, we have Michelle Wagner-Malecki, who's our Application Services Manager. She is the woman behind our IRIS operating system, and truly, I don't believe we'd be this far without her. So I just want to give her a special thank you for the guidance and leadership that she's provided to all of us. I don't think hardly any of the members know who she is, but I know that they will appreciate her. So thank you. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you for an excellent report and for bringing members of the staff down who've done outstanding work.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
That brings us to Benefits Administration and Marcel.
Hello again. I wanted to add to my report, one of the key things we're working on right now is developing an RFP for actuarial services. This is Chiron's last valuation. They'll be presenting to you tomorrow and then the final in March. So we'll be putting out an RFP for new actuarial services. If it will include both an RFP for services and an RFP for an audit. If Chiron is selected to continue to be our actuary, then we'll have another actuarial firm come in and audit the work that they've been doing. Happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Been 4 years already?
5. Yes. 2012.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Last but not least, we have Ted LaSalvia with 4 different reports. You can tee them up.
Good morning, everybody. First off, I want to give a brief update on the finance group. Currently, we are down 1 individual. My accounting manager, Rich Delgado, unfortunately was in a bike accident recently, so wanted to acknowledge him, his hard work in assisting us with the year-end process, specifically the development of the CAFR and the state controller's report, which takes a lot of our detailed information and submits it to the state of California. So our thoughts and prayers go to him for a speedy recovery. As you noted, we have completed our FY 2016 CAFR and submitted it to the GFOA for their Judging in the Excellence in Financial Reporting Award. We completed the audit with no significant audit adjustments. In fact, basically a clean opinion with no recommendations, which is something I strive for every year. The audit opinion was delivered on November the 23rd. Once again, a clean report, and it's the earliest that I've delivered it, specifically while implementing a new complicated piece of accounting literature that had me dived into the rabbit hole that is the investments group. And you'll hear more about that in the coming months as we go further into this fiscal year. During the month of January, staff will be primarily tasked with development and completion of more than 10,000 documents related to 1099-Rs, 1099 miscellaneous, and the W-2 forms that we have to send out to retirees. Currently, we're in the process of reviewing and producing those files necessary to generate those documents with our third-party producer. We will be incorporating lessons learned with the implementation of GASB 72, specifically in the investment arena. Normally, finance operates at a 30,000-foot level of actually dealing with the funds and the investments as a whole. Gatsby 72 had us get down to the granular level of the actual investment holding, and Carol Broad could appreciate that because she's had to sit through many a long investment committee on those types of investments. So consequently, that will have a further impact on the finance group here in FY17. With that, I will turn over to the first quarter budget versus actuals. For the first quarter ending September 30th, administrative expenses finished the quarter at $3.3 million. This is about 3% below the $3.4 million budget. Overall, year-to-date for the 3 months ending September 31st, our total actual expenses were 11.1, approximately 5.5% under plan, and the budget of 11.8 million. Salaries and fringe were on budget. We realized the headcount savings in FY16, so that rolls forward to the budgeted year for FY17. We understood what those would be, and it's kind of nice to see that we're on budget for this fiscal year. Currently, legal expenses, while seem very, very low at 0.1 million, it's about 31% under budget, primarily due to tax and fiduciary expenses, the actuals being less than budget. It's important to know that for the fiscal year, we did put a general provision for litigation. We expect litigation to continue on those open PSC-related cases. Consequently, we will keep an eye on that as we progress in the fiscal year. IT expenses were 0.4 million, 9.9%, approximately 10% under a $500,000 budget. Declines in technical support labor, pension support, professional services. These are the actual expenses that would normally hit in this fiscal year. Consequently, IT plans to be on budget for the full fiscal year, and so once again, this is something that as we get further along in FY17, we will keep an eye on. General operations expenses were 0.9 million on budget for the first quarter. We had lower expenses for fiduciary insurance, audit services, travel and training, and disability processing, offset by increased expenses related to temporary help in the health division, and higher actuary services related to non-retained work on the experience study. The experience study has been a subject of much discussion and additional work here in this fiscal year. Investment management expenses were 7.8 million, 6.6% under plan based upon the $8.3 million budget. I have a history of coming to this committee and giving you information as to why we're under budget. This year, it's important to note that when the FY17 budget was developed, we were using the 12/31/2015 values, which is like half year in FY16. That forces the investment group to actually project out where we will wind up at the end of the year. So what they had to do is they had to project remaining growth at that long-term expected rate of return that in fact did not materialize. So as a result, our total portfolio wasn't as high as we had actually budgeted, forecast it to be at the end of 2016. As a result, the investment management expenses are running below budget, with the exception of private equity and infrastructure, which is based on contracted amounts, and we actually record those values. So consequently, those values are on budget, but both real estate and equity and fixed income investment management fees are actually lower than what we'd budgeted. It's important to note that we had no capital expenditures here for the first quarter. The SDCERS board agenda and voting system upgrade project is now projected to be completed in FY18 and will now become part of the FY18 proposed budget, which I'll bring forward in the month of March. And with that, I will open the floor to any questions you may have on the budget. Seeing none, I will now proceed to the October trust financial statements. You have both September and October. I normally only address the latest current month. What a difference 4 months makes. The values presented in the financial statements do not reflect any fair value pickup related to private equity, infrastructure, and real estate because those values have not been received by State Street Bank at this time. We had net position of $6.9 billion, an increase of $159 million. This is in comparison to a net decrease at the end of June, our last fiscal year end. Investments totaled $7.1 billion, an increase of $163 million over the prior year. On the income statement side, the statement of changes in plan net position, we had total additions of $294 million. Total benefit payments and expenses of approximately $167 million. This resulted in an increase in net position of $127 million. This is in comparison to a decrease of $110 million at the same date last year. So year over year, we've had positive investment returns. Of course, investment income is the biggest change here. For the 4 months ended October 31st, net investment income was $177 million compared to a net investment loss of $66 million in the prior year. The schedule of reserves, it reflects the composition of net position restricted for pension benefits. As of October 31st, total reserves are $5.8 billion, an increase of $118 million over the prior year. And with that, I will turn this over to you for any questions you may have.
I don't see any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This brings us to the questions and comments from the chair, trustees, and staff. Mark? Nothing?
Nothing.
No non-docketed items.